Hi everyone, Jess here, Campaign Manager for Worth a Second Chance. I'm joined by Kerry White today, who is the Principal of Holy Family Catholic School in Adelaide. This is a little bit of a impromptu video that we're recording for you and for our webinar guest, who unfortunately didn't get to hear from Kerry on the day as he was struck with a very legitimate emergency. One of the young people at the school was at risk of having COVID, and so had to have a whole school closure on the day. So obviously Kerry had some stuff going on, wasn't able to join us, but is here today. So thank you so much for being with us, Kerry. And if you wouldn't mind just giving our audience a little intro about who you are and what your career's been like up until this point.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jess. Yeah, it's a pleasure to join you. So I'm Kerry White, Principal of Holy Family Catholic School. And in my career, I've been principal at 3 other schools, and also worked for a little while in Catholic Education SA. So, you know, it's my privilege to do the job that I do. I love doing it. And every day is a great day. And next year, we're looking forward in 2021 to some marvellous learning opportunities. So it's all go here at Holy Family.
Oh, very exciting. Thanks, Kerry. I look forward to hearing more about that potentially in our interview. So I've got a series of questions for you that we prepared to ask you on the day. So I might just run through these, but we can also let the conversation take us where it will. So Kerry, could you take us back to when you first became the principal of Holy Family Catholic School? How long ago was that, and what was the school culture like at the time when you became principal of the school?
Yeah. So that was about 19 years ago I came here, and I'd been principal for about 18 years prior to that in 2 or 3 schools. So I think when I first came here, I thought that I knew a little bit about the business. But I think over the next 19 years, I've realised how much I don't know. So yeah, when I came here, we served a very diverse community, and that's still the case. So it's still a very diverse community, and we've come to realise that's our strength. I think that our diversity. Yeah,
I love that, absolutely. And I think coming from that strength-based approach and seeing, rather than the complications, but the strengths that are available to you within a diverse community is incredible.
So when I came, I think that it was interesting that people were very welcoming, but I felt the staff were a little bit wary, and I couldn't really work out why. They used to say to me, they used to ask me if I would support them, and I remember thinking, I'm not sure what that means. And then I think subsequently I worked out was they were saying that they were hoping there wouldn't be many changes. So sorry about that, because that's actually exactly what I was doing. So I came in, and the parents weren't wary. They were very welcoming, but also they were very respectful. And so I found that was the first situation to overcome, was that their sort of shyness with me and sort of unwillingness to approach me as confidently as some other communities that I'd worked in. So yeah, it was right from the start, it was a really interesting experience. And day one, I had my first experience was a parent who met with me and told me what I could do with my so-and-so school and that they were leaving. And I kind of, after that meeting, I went out into the office and I said to them, was that for real? And they said, yeah. So I remember saying to this woman rather limply, well, you'll always be welcome back. So they were leaving forthwith, so they stormed out that day. So that was my initial experience. And interestingly, by the end of the week, I did have them back in. So that was probably a portent of what was to happen in the future. So yeah, it was very much like that. And I remember starting my relationship with families by doing what a lot of principals do, and that is standing out in the courtyard and saying hello to everyone. So even though they didn't approach me, I just kept persisting. And eventually they would stop and talk. And I think what happened was I identified who the leaders were of the community and sort of forged relationships. And they've proved to be almost lifelong relationships. So I'm still friends with those people now. And that's the thing about our school. There's a lot of return business. So we now have parents in the school who are parents in the school who are former students. We have 3 or 4 staff who were former students now working at the school, and we're about to employ another one. So there's that wonderful cycle of, as I say, return business. And that all of them are grateful, like we're not, as I keep saying, we're not perfect. We don't know everything there is to know, and we don't really want to know. We don't really want to be in that position where we think we know everything. So that's what keeps it fresh, and there's, a continual overlay of new things. That was the situation when I first came. I think the other thing was there was a perception of the school which was kind of a deficit perception by others outside the school. And even when I was appointed, people said, why are you going there? You won't be able to do the things that you like to do. And I was thinking, well, how do you know that? And so I came in with an agenda of excellence. And I remember, I think sadly, there were some attitudes in the school, and even the families themselves saw themselves in that deficit way, that they'd started to believe that of themselves, that they were unable to learn and unable to achieve, which was pretty sad. But fast forward 19 years and no one thinks like that now. Everyone thinks they can do anything. So that's marvellous. So that dot point has been achieved, that we have that efficacy amongst the children and the staff. Yeah. So, and the families, I think everyone, the bar's been raised, and that's a really, really big thing. So there are no limits. And then the school kind of progressed from there. So we went, the school doubled in size. So that was a good indicator of our success.
That's incredible. Actually, in our previous conversation, you mentioned that sort of fairly early on you developed what some might have called like a grandiose plan for your school and students. And I'd love to know a little bit more of the detail of what did that plan look like? Where did you, I know you obviously first began by connecting with the community and forming relationships, which is so important. And also in retrospect, were you able to execute that plan, or did it shift and change as you went?
Yeah. So I appointed a new architect with whom I'd worked, who's one of Adelaide's premier architects, and I'd worked with him at 2 previous schools. And the school immediately before coming here, I'd actually dismissed him as an architect because we had these box gutters and he couldn't resolve the problem. So I had enough of him. So I replaced him with another architect. But then when I came here, I needed a new architect, and he applied. So as I say, he's kind of a doyen of architects. And he just walked in. I thought, I wonder how this will go. And he just said to me, it's been a while. I said, yeah. So I knew pretty much he was the guy that I wanted. And so we then set about working together, and it was a great relationship and kind of a symbiotic relationship. And in the end, we used to swap roles. So I'd try to grab his sketching pencil from him and start drawing things, and then he'd start pontificating to me about learning stuff that he'd heard me say, and then he was claiming that was for his, that was his own, which was pretty cool. So it was a great relationship, and he's a pretty fearsome sort of guy. So he's not one to trifle with, but I probably enjoyed that part of it. So anyway, we started visioning from the start. So he's a really big thinker, and So we didn't really have a budget or anything like that. We didn't have a lot behind us, but we conceived this idea of a large curved building which would sit prominently on the boundary at the front of the school, because the existing school was set back in the property and there was a church in the middle of that property. So anyway, we conceived this vision for our school, and this was 20 years ago. And interestingly, at the end of the curve, on the eastern side, was an early learning centre. And at that time, 20 years ago, that was unheard of in most schools. Some colleges had early learning centres, but parish primary schools like this didn't. So we've still got that drawing. And so I still think back to that. And to answer your question, subsequently, that vision has been realised. So we submitted it, and I think I told you last time that it came back with a firm, message that this is far too grand for this context. What are you thinking? And I guess we were a bit naive that we thought we were thinking in terms of excellence. He, the architect, and I. So we wanted the very best for this community, and I think the total cost at the time was about $2.5 million. So it wasn't really outrageous. It was really just a smart thing to do. So anyway, that didn't work out, but as is our way here, we find a way, so if we have an idea, our mindset is a growth mindset. So we don't think about we don't caught up with why not, let's look at what we can do. So subsequently that vision has been realised, and now I look out from my office here and look at a 2-storey building that we subsequently built. And we were able to do that through the building revolution of the Rudd years. We got 3 million. And I always felt we got ripped off because we had 600 at the time, and you got 3 million if you had 300 plus. So I tried to get 6 million out of them, but they wouldn't come to the party. But anyway, we took the 3 million, and I remember going to the builder and saying, I need 14 classrooms. I got 3 million, there's 3 million, I need 14 classrooms. And he said, I can do 12. And I said, I don't think you're hearing me, Chai. I need 14, take it or leave it. So he kindly took it. And so we got 14 classrooms out of that. And we'd previously built a hall. That architect and I had already built quite a big hall, which was not typical at the time. It was not the sort of facility you had in primary school. So we faced resistance along the way. Why would you need a hall like that? And of course, subsequently, every school got halls and assembly areas. So we're a little bit ahead of our time. I guess that was the thing. And that's continued. I think we've consistently been a little bit ahead of our time. And the Early Learning Centre, that was another good story, that we started that. We had that idea 19 years ago. And this year, it opened full time. So it took us all that time, but we finally got there. And often, I talk to my colleagues about that. I think that sometimes, people in schools often are thinking ahead, and so systems and governments don't necessarily have the perspective that we do. And so that's, I encourage people, be efficacious, believe in yourself. And if you have a vision, follow it through.
And I imagine that the focus on, I guess, the architecture and the physical space, was that very much about, the focus on excellence and helping young people be like, you deserve a beautiful space for you, and like access to resources, and we're taking pride in our space that we've created for you to take pride in themselves. Was that a connection?
When I first started and the school started to grow, what we did was we just brought in transportable classrooms. And then in the end, I said to the system, now we need a number of classrooms. May I design my own? So instead of getting the regular single classroom, would it be okay if I designed a double classroom, because we want to work collaboratively? And they agreed with that. So then we just had this incessant caravan of transportable classrooms coming into the school. It's quite amazing. If you look at it on a spreadsheet, it's incredible. But what we did was we designed a space for a double class with 2 teachers. And so I don't know where that idea came from, but it's proved to be a good idea. So once we brought in the first double, then everyone else wanted one. Can we have one of those as well? And so we thought it was Christmas with these transportable classrooms, mass produced, coming off the road, set them up, and there was like a grid-like pattern that extended out into the oval. So we ended up with about 36 transportables out there.
Wow.
Someone just I'd forgotten about that, and they reminded me the other day, because now we have 0 transportables. So they said to me, you know, that's a pretty good achievement, you know, bringing all those in and then getting them all out and building solid. And I used to say that, I used to think that the learning spaces didn't matter that much. It was like the quality of the teaching. And I say, you know, Mary McKillop taught kids under a tree, you know, it's all relative. But once we had all the children in, and then once we started building purpose-built buildings, I realised that the learning spaces were far more significant in that they were much better. And so, and also with our influence from Reggio Emilia, that the learning space is the third teacher. I really agree with that. And so we've gone on, and then we've just gone on with that. And then we're currently building a new building, which is called Curiosity Central, which is like, it's a huge learning hub, and it's under construction at the moment in the centre of our school. And that will be the real celebration of what we've learned about architecture. And the children and the community are so excited about that. And the other day I was when I came into the school, Michael Wanganeen said to me, you know, you've got a diploma of building, haven't you? I said, yeah. And a diploma of, you know, electrician. Yeah. And I said, what about plumbing? He goes, oh, yeah. He said, you know, next year, this building is going to be absolutely packed out with kids. Everyone's going to want to get in there. And I said to him, yeah, I think you're right. So that, you know, what I'm describing is that the children relate to their school. They love their school. And a great story was that in a recent holiday, a family with a very young child told me that the child asked to drive past the school to see if it was all right during the first wave of COVID. Just wanted to out. So that kind of thing, you can't buy that, you know, that attitude. And we find that children like to, they love to talk about their learning spaces, and they love to write about them. And so I think that's good. And I think also the teachers appreciate those spaces. So we've gone on now and had a 20-year relationship with the same architect, and we've built halls and classroom after classroom. We've built a Triple M multimedia centre. We've built the fish farm and the aquaponics set up. And it just goes on and on. And now this learning hub replete with multimedia and all the latest you know, facilities that we now come to take for granted in our school. So we've really left behind that deficit tag long ago. And along the way, we've provided fantastic access to technology, but we very rarely speak about that, you know. So we don't really think that technology is a driver. We think that it's kind of an enabler, but we don't sort of, you know, hitch our star to technology. As I say, it's just there, but so is the furniture. So a lot of things.
Yeah, so it's sort of a tool to be utilised. Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you have this incredible. Sorry.
Say about that with the children, that what I've noticed is that when they, like, we're speaking on a MacBook Air here, and all of the children have exactly what I have. So every child is provided with that. And what I notice is that they and the teachers, when they get this kind of device, it gives them sort of autonomy, and they have a bit of swag about them, because I think you know, they're toting a bit of heat here. They got their own devices.
Yeah,
I really love that. And when I get, when I walk around the school, and I'm pretty much a deregulator, so I don't really like to have too many rules. And when you see children, they'll find every nook and cranny in the school, and they'll be on their devices. They'll still be running around and doing other stuff. But often, it's more often than not, it's collaborative. People think that technology is isolatory, but I don't, that's not my experience. I think, as you and I, like, we're connected through it. And I think that's, it's not only ubiquitous, I think it's also socially enabling.
It's true, yeah. There's some incredible benefits to it, as long as they're like able to have a diversity of experiences and then the ways they use it. I wanted to ask you, Kerry, about the students and about the school culture and values. So I was wondering, what are your values, and what kind of approaches do you take with the young people?
Yeah, so our values, we've taken a lot of time, and we've been influenced by a range of influences. Obviously the Christian one, the Christian ethic is a huge, it's the main influence with us, but it's also supported by our positivity. And I think, like, the Christian tradition is pretty hopeful tradition, and that suits me fine. Like, I think I'm pretty much an optimistic, hopeful person, and I can always see the good things, that are available. So I think that's we've got these very strong influences. So Christianity, positive psychology, Reggio Emilia, cognitive coaching. It's just like layer upon layer. Berry Street from Melbourne, I'm not sure if you're aware about that, trauma-informed approaches to pedagogy, and so on and on. We're always looking. We also have another measure, Clara, which is the CRIC learning analysis, which gives children a kind of a spider graph of their own capabilities. So we're, over a number of years, we've measured children's learning capabilities. So they have a sense, they have a good picture of themselves as a learner. So I guess over that time, we've built up quite an awesome toolkit, which we we provide the children, and then that gives them autonomy and a sense of efficacy. And then within that, the POS Ed side, character strengths are really important. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that stuff, but it's about every person has 24 character strengths, but some of them are dominant. So it might be bravery or humour, whatever. But we give we're always teaching the children, and I think that's what happens with the technology, that the technology is there, but we also have what I call like an intellectual infrastructure, and an infrastructure of thinking which supports, which we can draw on as learners, which gives us a sense of who we are as a learner. And I think that is so important for everyone in the teacher-learning interaction. If you know who you are, then it's a good antecedent to helping other people. But if you're kind of lost and stuck, and you lack efficacy, that's where I think that's what I started with, was that attitude, I can't, and now I can. And my granddaughter in my granddaughter in Sydney, Mary, says to me, Granddaddy, at Paddington Primary, we just say, I can't do it yet. And that yet is that kind of yet, you would have heard that. And that's really our mindset, that we're on this learning journey, but we're driving the bus. And so I think that's, we've got all those, and so many things, but that language is really important. That, and I'm not sure, I often think about it, what did we do before we had each of these influences providing us with a language to understand ourselves as learners? I can recall people would ask, what was that experience like? And people would reply rather lamely, oh, it was good, and really non-specific. But now I find, and I've often said that, so visitors to the school, I talk about this infrastructure, and people go, oh yes, that's all very well. And then I say, well, just think about that meeting what we just had with a group of teachers. What did you hear? And they say, yeah, we could hear that language coming through. And then it comes through with the teachers, from the teachers to the children. But it's not about us. We're not didactic in that way. So we don't say, well, these are the principles of positivity. Let's learn them in a rote way. It's more about modelling them.
Absolutely. And I imagine all those tools and different perspectives, like sounds like, critical thinking, understanding yourself as a learner and your strengths, which is very strengths based. It's like you're giving young people that beautiful solid foundation to, know who they are, build that confidence and sense of self, so that, they're not comparing and say, I'm not as good as that person, or I'm not good at this. They understand that there is diversity and strengths, and that makes us, better together, kind of thing. And that can often...
Learning's not really competitive. I also wrote something about this on the weekend, that there's an imperative in education which is kind of basically competitive, but children don't see learning in that way. Children they don't think it's a competition, so they'll stop. They'll stop and help someone else, or they'll stop and help a teacher, or they'll stop and think, that's pretty cool. They'll reflect. It's not always this driven to an outcome. And I think that our data shows that we've engendered this amazing sense of belonging in the school. So all of our data, over a very long period, reports that high levels of cognitive engagement. So that's been one of the big payoffs for us. Where does this all lead? Well, I say, up until this year, consistently for 8 years, our students were like about 12% above the state average for cognitive engagement. And I used to say to some of my colleagues, people supervising me, that's pretty good, and they're saying, oh, what about your NAPLAN results? Yeah, they're okay, but I'm just saying that cognitive engagement is significant. And then interestingly, after this year, the toughest year of it all, when we got our wellbeing and engagement data, I went straight to it and had a look, and cognitive engagement had rocketed up to 16%. And then when you looked at all the percentiles, they were up in the 90s of people functioning at a high level. So that was really satisfying. Because I think, that's, if you're well, there's that correlation between wellbeing and learning. It's kind of thrown around, but I don't think we measure it enough, the wellbeing side. Lots of measures for, literacy and numeracy, which is fine. But, and that's what's in it for us about literacy and numeracy, that I know there's a correlation that if someone's going well in their literacy, then that enhances their wellbeing. So it's
symbiotic kind of feed each other, and the well-being consequently also it feeds their engagement and their ability to learn. I completely agree with you around measuring well-being as well, because the more we can measure it, the more we can place value on it collectively. I wanted to bring you back to the belonging, because I think that's sounds like one of the huge strengths of your school is that sense of community and belonging. And to bring it back to Worth a Second Chance, a lot of the young people we work with don't feel that they belong anywhere. Or maybe fall into communities where their sense of belonging is determined on some not so healthy things. And so, how have you been able to achieve that in your school? Because the reason I came into contact you was that, I saw you on the TV and in an amazing article that you had never expelled a student as your time as a principal. And for some people, that's quite revolutionary. So I wanted you to be able to speak to how that increases your sense of belonging and the well-being of your students.
I think that's right. I think that, in the trauma-informed aspect that we've learned, what we've realised is that, going back to attachment theory and so on, that failure for children to attach to significant people in their lives is catastrophic for the child, and they end up with a diminished notion of self. So I think what we do here is that we embrace that Christian idea that, people are basically good. and then from the Reggio idea that children are competent citizens from birth. So even in the womb, they're listening, they're keying in, and they're keying into the positives and they're keying into the negatives. So you're right, when those children come to school who have been trauma affected, and they're the ones who may, in some environments, become, suspended or expelled or whatever, excluded in some way, they start with the thesis, you don't like me. I know you guys don't like me. And so I've read about that, but I've also seen it in children's eyes. And like where the child comes to the door here, and that happens all day. They come here all day. They come in to see me, and they're looking to relate. I think they do relate to me, and they relate to our staff. And so it's not an accident that it happens here. That we, I try to engender that sense that everyone's welcome here. And I think sometimes people, teachers over time, they might say, well, I think he cares more about the children than us. And in a way, it's kind of true. I mean, I do care deeply about them, but we are the adults. We are in control. We're here to care. And so, I'm quite unremitting in that regard for children. And I find that quite easy. And I think that, like people say, where did that come from? I think I was like that as a teacher. So I was a classroom teacher for 10 years before I became a principal. And I think I operated in exactly the way I did all those years ago. And that just see children as basically competent. So yeah, it's been an easy situation for me. It's something I didn't sort of sit down and say, well, I'm not going to be punitive. I've just learned over the years that, in every aspect of life, you water the flowers, not the weeds. So, and I realise that when I'm working with people, whether they're a child, a teacher, or a parent, they already know. It's not for me to point out what the challenges are for them. They already know, But what is refreshing is that if they meet someone that can, and we do use this as a strategy in our school. Every interaction I have in the school, I start with what we call the specks of gold. So people will come to me in an absolutely miserable state, and then I'll say to them, what's gone well today? And they kind of look at me and say, like, are you serious? I'm here for this problem. But I don't let them get away with that. I say, let's find something today that went well. And so the child might say, oh, well, Sally said I look nice. I'll say, well, there you go. There's a positive. And often think it's a bit like a spoonful of sugar lets the medicine go down. It's kind of it's a good way to start. If you start on a positive, it becomes cumulative. And people with almost, I think there's an innate desire for people to see the good, and they're looking for hope. But you can go either of two ways. You can either go that positive orientation and promote a sense of gratitude. And that's one of our basic principles. Let's look at the things for which we are grateful.
Yeah.
And most of us, like I remember thinking and talking to principals about, they don't have resources. And I remember saying to a friend of mine, mate, I met a guy from Africa and he was so poor he couldn't afford chalk. I said, that's negative. Like in Australia, relatively, we don't have that level. So everything is relative. But I think you're right, what you were saying about architecture earlier and spaces. I think over time I realised that access to resources is really important. I think that when I was a young teacher, I think, well, I can create something out of nothing. But there's a limit to that. I think when you have adequate resources, I think, so over time, the importance of resources has gone up.
Yeah.
I think purpose overall is the most important thing, having a sense of purpose, a clear idea. As I say, who you are, what your values are. And our values in our school are positive emotion, trust, and support. They are the three values. And we've honed those over time. We've realised, we've investigated them, we realise what they are. And they are at the basis of all of our success. When those values are in place, we are successful.
Yeah,
And this year, in
absolutely.
all the tests of things that have come our way, that's what I've seen people access those values. So then they've become virtues, because values are what you talk about.
Yeah.
Virtue, as I say here, and our chairperson quoted me the other day, that culture is what people do when no one's looking. And I think that's what we've seen this year. So those values are core. You need to know what do you believe,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
and that's what I say. Coming back in this crisis, I've said, we're in a world where there are very few black and whites. Overnight, that's happened. So where things which we previously said, well, that'll never happen, they've happened. So I think that's the role of education, is to prepare children and people for an uncertain world. And I think the best way of doing that, and I said that to our staff when we came back after our closure recently, I said, I cannot tell you what to do in every situation. But what I can advise you to do is to access those values: positive emotion, trust, and support, and interrogate your actions. So if what you're proposing to do is in line with those values, then that's what I'm asking you to do. And I find people respond to that. They know what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've done all that groundwork in sort of nurturing those skills and supports and resources. So
Yes.
it's like trusting. That's the
Yeah.
trust comes in for people to do the right thing with all that
Yeah.
they have access to.
And we're starting earlier and earlier. So now the children in the early learning centre, the 2 and 3 year olds, or not the babies yet, but the really young children down there, they're using that language. They're using the growth mindset. And I heard that story the other day where we talk about bucket filling. Have you heard about that? So the idea is to add to someone's bucket, not take from it. And the 3 year olds were talking about that stuff. You're taking from my bucket, or positively, Mum, I filled their bucket today. So all of those things are not accidental. They are strategic, but they're based on core beliefs. I think that's what we're doing. And that's why we started the Early Learning Centre, was that we wanted to forge relationships with families as early as possible. Not to boss them around and tell them what to do, how to be parents, but to listen to them, to be aware of what their needs were and to step into that. And so we're seeing that vision come to fruition. When I go down if I walk past the ELC, they're hanging over the fence, Mr. White. And if you start with a conversation with one, you've got 20. And I think that's what it's about, that they see you as a person and they know that you care for them. And so from there, they're on that point of whether, if you're punitive with children, well, that would, that's the problem with that. So, but we don't go easy on people. Like, if there's an issue, we deal with it strongly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because a lot of teachers that tuned into our webinar were wondering, if I've got a kid acting out or disrupting classrooms, like, what do I do in that moment? And I'd love some practical examples from you, if you could, to share with those teachers.
Yeah. So as I say, like one of my deputies, who's now a principal, he says, what you give out is what you get back. So that was his considered opinion of, what he'd learned over time. And so I think that's the issue, that you address the issue. And I know what you say about, my deputy and I spoke at a secondary school recently, and we weren't sure how what we were speaking about would go down with these secondary tough sort of teachers. And but they were really open to it. So when we talked about those values, they really got that. But one guy at the end, almost in a torturous way, he said, like, I get all of that, But what about when, that stuff you're talking about, growth mindset and all of that, what about when the kids are really naughty? And my answer to him was, well, that's when you really need to bring that to the table, because when everything's fine and dandy, you don't have to access those resources of problem solving and meeting them where they're at. So I think what it's about, what we do here, is that if there are problem situations, we address it. So we go in and work in the classroom with the teachers. We meet with the parents. So we do a lot of that, a lot of communication. So if something's happened, we don't sweep things under the carpet. We let everyone know. If someone's been hurt, we let both families know what's going on. And we're always working through with it. So I think that the tenor of what I'm saying is that we don't give up on anyone. And I think in the end, it reaches that critical mass where everyone understands that and they rejoice in that. So sometime if I'm speaking to a family who's been adversely affected, I'll say, I'll be talking about that and say, like, with your child at the moment, your child is the victim. But at some time in the future, your child may be the one in need. And I'm giving you the same guarantee that no matter what happens, we won't give up on them. So it might be behavioural, it might be medical, it might be social. This is part of life. And people, I think, interestingly, I don't know if it came out in another interview I did, that other families are incredibly empathetic about the situation that, say, a child who's experiencing problems and behaving not appropriately. Other families actually have a high level of understanding about that. I think they can see, there, but for the grace of God go I, that so more than, maybe the pub talk would say, well, throw the book at them, kick them out, that kind of stuff. I think most people, there is more empathy than that. And it's, learning is relational, change is relational. That's the standard we set for ourselves. And it's not easy. And I don't mind saying that I'm continually reflecting on what I do. And so many things, as you can imagine, in a large institution like this, the very last thing you want to happen happens. So there could be two children who have an issue, and the last thing you want to do is for that to be replicated, but it happens. That's and one of my favourite saying is, that's community. So when things that happen where you shake your head, you just have to say to yourself, well, that's community. So good and the bad. Community is fantastic, but also community is challenging. So there are, as I said, there are no easy answers. But we're the same as any other school. As I said, we don't have all the answers, but we do have a strong game plan, and we have strong values underpinning our action.
So you've got the foundations there, the resources, the relationships to be able to have those, safe and open communication between student, between family, between teacher, between other students.
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense, because you can't kind of wait until the problem arises to start treating it.
Yeah.
It's got to be foundational. That makes sense.
Yeah. And learning is the ultimate distraction. It's kind of an irony in a school. Like when I first started here, is to say, well, we've got a strong focus on learning, which may be unusual in the school. And I was trying to be funny about that, but really learning is at the core. And what I find is that it's a great icebreaker with children. So when I move around the school, I talk to them about their reading or their writing. We've got an online publication called Holy Family Writes, where we have children of all ages. Fortnightly, we publish this online magazine of their writing. And so forever saying to anyone I meet, any child, have you been published in Holy Family Writes? I know. Would you write me something? So I just say, could you write me something? Because I want to publish it. And, you know, immediately, so they've got buy-in. They think, well, he's interested in me, and they'll write something. And then I look out across the courtyard here, and at various times I can see them streaming across the courtyard. That happened today when I was in the middle of a meeting. They come running in with their sheets of paper where they've written something, because they know this guy values that. He values stuff that you write down. If you write stuff down, he'll read it, or get you to read it to him. And the same with reading. You know, I'm always saying to children, because I'm interested, but also it's a good way in relationship. Ask them what they're reading. You know, in this school, and I've said at assembly, you know, we want this school to be as well known for our literacy achievement as for the other cool things we do, like, you know, our farm, Barramundi farm, and our purple spotted gudgeon farm, and our aquaponic gardens, and our VR, and all of those cool things. But also at the heart of it is literacy, because that's about the person. So, yeah.
I love that. Oh, that's wonderful. And I think just, again, so much of what you're talking about for me is just, I just hear how you're building up the student, you know, showing them their value, showing them that they're connected, showing them that they can do it, maybe not yet, but that they can. And that's all young people need, really, like that those secure attachments and that support. The last question I want to ask you, Kerry, is sort of for any of the principals or school leadership professionals in that might be listening. So when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that you've made lots of mistakes along the way, which you want others to learn from. So I was wondering, you know, what are your key pieces of advice for those people listening today?
Yeah, I've got plenty. Like, I think one of the mistakes I made over time, I think that I used to gravitate to people who thought like me, but now I don't. I think there's no one way, so I'm really strong on that. So my mantra is find a way, find your own way, you know, be yourself. So I think all that stuff we do about you know, self-knowledge and self-actualization, it's leading to, you know, teachers having a sense and principals having a sense of who they are. So you don't have to do it the way I do it. Do your own way. How boring if we all did things. That's what I've realised. I've got some other sort of sayings. I say, well, you know, I say to my leaders, you know, never, we're like royalty. We don't complain and we don't explain. You know, so whatever it is, whatever we're dealing with it, we deal with it. We don't complain about it. That's our role. And we don't explain, because the kind of explain is eggs of sort of self-doubt. So I think, you know, back yourself. And that's what I would say to principals. And I was speaking about it yesterday in a Zoom meeting, that I think it's really important that that we embrace our principals, and we let every principal know that we highly value them, and that they got into this position for a reason, that they had those character strengths that were sought at the time to get them into that position. I think we should do everything we can to encourage them to develop their own vision, and that they and to get out of their way as much as we can, so that they can fulfill that vision. Because people at system level, I've always found people at system level have never got in my way. They've just been amazing over the years, what they've allowed me to do. And I think government is in the same, is that there's a bit of, you know, earned autonomy, you know, so if you do a good job, and that's how I regard it as a principal in the classroom. If people are doing good job, they don't need me in that interaction. So I'll quietly put into place the tools they need to enhance what they're doing. So I think also, I think to take out, you know, that any semblance of competition in education, I think that's totally counterproductive. And I said in this conference yesterday, in my first role as a principal, I learned was from a parent I worked with. He said to me, you know, if you're doing okay and someone else is doing better, you're still doing okay. And I try to live by that, you know. So, the politics of envy or blame, they're the roads to nowhere. So I think we need to have accept our lot, look at the resources we've got, use them as well as we can, and fulfil that vision. And often, I'll quote Margaret Thatcher, when people say, various things that you do, here comes the groundsman. Hey, I've just gone this conference yet. What was I saying about, I've lost it
Margaret
now.
Thatcher.
Oh, Margaret Thatcher. When people say, like, if I look at the things I've done over the years, so I introduced Apple computers in the school. My colleague said to me, we're not allowed to use Apple in schools. I said, who said? And then when we first did wireless, like 15 years ago, we bought this cool wireless Wi-Fi controller in the school. And people say to me, we're not allowed to use wireless. Who said? And it's a bit like Margaret Thatcher said to the interviewer, George Negus, who said? Who are these people? What are their names? And I think that's what I've said to my colleagues, that we're much better at shutting ourselves down than our people supervising us are, So people use them as an excuse. Oh, we're not allowed to do it, or we can't do it, or whatever. Just get on with it. I think, and have that sense of efficacy. And look at our character strengths. That's the theory of character strengths. 24 character strengths. We've all got 4 dominant character strengths. My top one is optimism. So if you've got that strength, utilize it. And if you've got people around you with different strengths, utilize those. Where part learning is it's collaborative. It's we're social human beings, and I think that's what you're on about. Enabling. And I was saying about children, that children will do all these wonderful things if we enable it, if we allow them to do it. But if they're trying to break in, with their input, and they can't find a way in, well, then they'll use their 100 languages to let you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
They won't use their words. They'll let you know in another way. They're not happy. And I think that's what we do. If you talk about those challenging children, we've got children in the school at the moment, and we're trying to work out what will engage them. And we know that that's the task. And until we work that out for every single child in the school, then we're failing in our role, that we have to find a way. And I'm working with a student today, and I know the way through with him is humour. I use my humour with him to engage him. And he'll cycle around, but he'll keep coming back. And what I worry about is when he stops coming back, so he's coming to me because he's looking for something. I think that's what, teaching, that people are brought to us by their families in trust. There's that trust that I'm talking about. There's that positive emotion. Parents come to us with that sense, positive emotion, trust in us, and they're looking for that support.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I think it's a really good way to end it. Sort of that trust, support, and the positive emotions. There's a beautiful values and virtues to have in a school. I think everyone should have them. So thank you so much for your generosity and your time, Kerry, and sharing so many pearls of wisdom with us. I have no doubt it's going to be really helpful for a lot of educators and principals out there. So thank you so much.
Nice to chat, Jess.
Nice to chat to you too.